However, off the project until you publicly apologize to my son," the CEO yelled in the boardroom. "Okay." Next morning he smirked. "I earned your lesson," the new CEO said. He handed the resignation letter, the company's largest client. "Sir, tell me you didn't." He called me old school in front of the entire strategy team, smirked like he invented oxygen, then tried to explain my own compliance schema back to me using a flowchart he copied off LinkedIn. I didn't even correct him. Just sat there sipping the same shitty break room coffee I've had for 19 years and listened to Lucas, fresh out of whatever MBA kennel the CFO's money bought, call my audit flags paranoid bottlenecks. That was my first real clue. This wasn't about optimization. It was about eraser. People think quiet means weak. They think tenure means you're too tired to bite back. That's why execs love legacy employees until we remind them that we built the bones they're still dancing on. Lucas didn't know the difference between risk logs and access protocols. He thought segregation of duties was about seating charts. And yet somehow this walking nepotism grenade landed the title of Director of Operational Efficiency. No interviews, no background in systems, just a recycled TED talk voice and a last name that made HR curtsy like it was still 1954. Before Lucas showed up, my days were a loop of quiet wins. No fanfare, just logs clean, pipelines humming, no outages. I trained every intern they threw at me. Even helped 3 former CFOs turn their clueless kids into decent junior analysts, 2 of whom still sent holiday cards. But Lucas wanted blood. He walked in and started slicing without reading the schematics. Deleted redundancy tags I'd planted after a near miss from the SEC back in 2018. I asked him politely if he wanted to review the audit history before making changes. He waved me off and said, "It's called Agile, Mason. Maybe Google it." That's when I knew we weren't in a restructuring. We were in a purge. By the way, if you're still here, take a second to like the video and subscribe. It means a lot more than you think. 97% of people listen without subscribing. But this one's different. This is the one they'll remember. Back to Lucas. His second week, he pushed an internal memo to sunset a tool I'd built after the Fin court breach. One that cross-referenced external vendor changes against our internal payroll entries. His reasoning: it clutters the dashboard. I scheduled a one-on-one. He skipped it twice. Then he messaged me on Slack. Just trim the fat and get with the program. No signature, no greeting. I flagged the risk, documented every change, sent it quietly to internal review. The CFO called me into a Zoom the next morning. Full company, 117 attendees, cameras on. He smiled, but not the kind that means you're safe. Said I had undermined a promising leader's momentum and demanded a public apology to Lucas for creating a culture of fear and inflexibility. I didn't flinch, just unmuted and said okay. That was it. The room went silent, but silence has always been my strongest language. And when I said okay, I wasn't agreeing. I was preparing. Lucas didn't even read the file names before dragging them to the graveyard. Just called them legacy bloat and wiped out 6 cross-verification nodes I'd personally built after the last SEC compliance warning. One of them was a multi-factor check on disbursements that caught 2 fraudulent vendor payments in 2020. But according to Lucas, if it wasn't in his color-coded Excel from week 1, it didn't matter. He'd labeled anything older than 5 years archaeological debt. I kid you not. Archaeological. As if decades of institutional memory were some kind of fossil to be swept aside so his daddy could brag about the new lean tech transformation. In next quarter's investor call, I sent him a polite message, flagged a vulnerability his deletions had exposed, one that would allow duplicate contractor IDs to pass through unchallenged bypassing invoice limit rules. I even attached screenshots and a before-after flow. He replied 3 hours later with a single line. "Appreciate the heads up. Let's stay solution-oriented." That's rich coming from a man who thought sandbox environment meant he needed to download a browser plugin. I escalated the issue internally, quietly through the same secure back channel I'd helped the compliance team set up years ago. I wasn't trying to embarrass him. I was trying to protect us. You'd think a $600 million company would care about safeguards that kept us out of federal court. But no, what they cared about was hierarchy. And Lucas's last name sat on top of the pyramid. When the CFO got wind of my escalation, he didn't call a meeting. He didn't ask for context. He didn't review the flagged risks, the duplicate entries, or the potential liability. No, he scheduled another all-hands Zoom cameras on. Lucas's face glowing like he just won a spelling bee. "Mason," the CFO began, leaning into his webcam like he was delivering a eulogy. "We've received word that you are creating internal friction, that your methods are obstructive, my son is trying to innovate, and you're clinging to outdated systems." I said nothing. "Effective immediately," he continued. "You're off the operational pipeline unless you're willing to publicly apologize for questioning leadership." A few people blinked. One gasped. Most just looked down like hostages pretending not to hear the ransom. Lucas didn't speak. He just smiled. That little half smirk of someone who's never had to earn authority, just inherited it like a family lake house. I unmuted, said, "Understood," and I logged off. No rebuttal, no dramatic exit speech, because power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits. Quiet, patient, surgical, just long enough for the room to forget where it came from. The cursor blinked on the resignation template, but I didn't type a word. Not yet. I just sat in the glow of the monitor, letting the silence settle like dust in a server room. My hands were steady. No rage, no panic, just the cold clarity that comes after someone mistakes your silence for submission one too many times. That Zoom call, that wasn't a punishment. It was permission. I opened the encrypted drive I hadn't touched in years. Buried inside were digital artifacts from a version of me they'd all forgotten existed. A younger Mason back when I still went by consultant instead of legacy asset. That was the title on the contract. 2004. Original systems architect, pre-acquisition, pre-rebrand, pre-every suit, who walked in pretending this place was built yesterday. I found the addendum with the clause I remembered drafting myself back when I didn't trust anyone's word, not even theirs. Clause 7C. In the event of forced project removal without due process or cause, contractor retains exclusive rights to derivative software modules created independently during original system design, including but not limited to legacy audit frameworks, vendor compliance protocols, and attached reporting dashboards. In plain terms, if they cut me without cause, I own the bones. They never amended it, never noticed, not once in 19 years. I started building my exit sequence the same way I built everything else here. Quietly, precisely, no loose ends. I logged into my admin console, my real one, not the shiny new front Lucas had slapped on for optics. I disabled 3 keys tied to internal sync licenses. Not revoked, just expired. Graceful shutdowns. Nothing to trigger alerts yet. I printed my resignation letter, left space at the bottom for something I wasn't ready to write yet. Then I opened a second file, my checklist. Not a to-do list, a kill switch catalog. Every asset, every service, every vendor line where my name or my LLC appeared on the contract. Ridge South Systems, my original consulting outfit, technically never dissolved. I just let it drift into dormancy until now. First item, revoke license handshake for the audit dashboard. Second, disable backup sync to Lucas's investor-ready view, the one he kept bragging about at Thursday stand-ups. Third, prep archival handover of encryption logs to legal. On paper, it looked like a simple cleanup, but anyone with half a clue would realize what was missing. I encrypted the logout timers, labeled them session rotation maintenance, and set them to cascade, one system every 12 hours, just enough to avoid suspicion until it was too late. Then I reached under my desk and unplugged the thumb drive that had been sitting in a dummy port since 2015. Inside the last working copy of the compliance shadow logs. No cloud, no duplicates, no backups, just mine. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't rebellion. It was insurance. Because if they were going to kick me out of the house I built, they weren't getting to keep the foundation. The first system to stutter was the investor portal. Just a soft timeout error. Nothing catastrophic yet. Lucas probably thought it was a server burp or forgot to renew a token. I could practically hear him blaming some faceless contractor in Bangladesh before even checking the error log. But if he had checked, he would have seen the status line. License ping returned new inactive handshake. That handshake used to be automatic until I shut it off. Meanwhile, the dashboard he loved parading around, the one he named Apollo Metrics, like he'd launched the damn thing to the moon, it flickered, loaded blank tiles, then froze. He'd hard-coded it to pull from a live view table I had buried behind a secondary firewall. One that filtered out test entries, ghost vendors, and placeholder shells. Without my key, it saw nothing. And Lucas saw a white screen where his investor demo data should have been. Still, no one suspected a thing. That's the beauty of quiet exits. Everyone's too busy with their next meeting to notice what's no longer functioning until the house lights cut off completely. Legal finally caught the first scent. A vendor renewal auto flagged for review. The name Ridge South Systems LLC, my company, my original consulting identity from before the merger. Technically never absorbed. Someone in procurement had forwarded it with a red AI to legal. I imagined a junior associate squinting at the metadata, wondering why this dormant shell just generated a license conflict flag. They'd figure it out eventually, but not before the dominoes finished falling. I walked into HR with my resignation printed and folded clean, slid it across the desk with a badge clipped to it like an afterthought. The receptionist smiled too brightly. "Oh, are you transferring departments?" I didn't answer, just nodded, murmured, "Appreciate your time," and left before the glass doors even shut behind me. She didn't flip the letter open. She wouldn't have understood the last page anyway. the one with the summary of attached derivative rights and the timestamp of my final login triggers. Outside, it was drizzling. Not a storm, not yet, but enough to feel like the air had changed. Back in the office, I knew they were scrambling, just not for the right reasons. Lucas was probably calling it, blaming AWS latency. Legal was flagging expired contracts with words like legacy exposure. And the CFO, he was likely rehearsing a quarterly call pitch about internal streamlining without realizing the foundation was already cracked beneath his feet. This was the phase no one notices. The part where all the pieces shift slightly out of alignment, not broken, just disconnected. And when you disconnect enough threads, even the prettiest tapestry starts to fall apart. Lucas waltzed in Monday morning like he'd just negotiated world peace. Aviators on his collar, protein shake in hand, fake tan glowing under the fluorescence. He did a little finger gun move at the receptionist who looked like she was actively trying to fade into the ficas, then strutted down the hall like a dog off leash, the swagger of someone convinced that silence meant surrender. When he reached my row, he paused, looked at my desk, really looked. No coffee cup, no post-it wall, no half-worn wrist brace I usually kept by the keyboard, just the dull, silent emptiness of someone who'd left with intent. I wasn't there, and neither was the heartbeat of his demo. Learned your lesson, huh? He mumbled to the empty chair, trying to save face in front of the junior analyst nearby, who gave him a confused blink and returned to pretending her screen wasn't frozen. Across the building in a room with blackout blinds and 4 standing desks, it was getting twitchy. An alert had triggered at 7:43 a.m. sharp. Unauthorized credential detected. License key invalid. Normally, that would have been a routine panic button. Someone fat-fingered a password. A vendor changed a handshake. But this one, it was tied to the core reporting engine. The license key didn't just fail. It returned null. No trace, no fallback, no shadow copy. The system didn't just reject access. It had no idea what access was anymore. At 8:12 a.m., a Level 3 support engineer sent an internal note to their team lead. Weird thing, Ridge South Systems is showing as vendor owner for CF Pipeline off. Isn't that Mason's? At 8:17 a.m., legal Slack thread went from idle to DEFCON 2. A paralegal posted a screen cap of a flagged agreement that hadn't been updated since 2009. One sentence highlighted, system continuity rights to remain property of Ridge South Systems unless advisory contract terminated under Section 14b3. No signature line from corporate, no overwrite, just my initials, the date, and a digital hash that hadn't expired. By 8:23 a.m., the CFO's Slack pinged from Melissa R. Corp. Legal to Darren CFO. Message: Are you aware Mason Drake's name is still listed as the primary licensor for the core financial system? I need confirmation ASAP. This affects investor access. He didn't respond because at that exact moment, Lucas was refreshing his dashboard again and again and watching every graph he promised to deliver to investors load as white boxes and red question marks. Smugness is a fragile currency. One bad morning, one unsynced feed, one buried contract clause, and suddenly you're not the future of the company. You're just the kid who broke the pipes trying to paint the kitchen. He probably thought I was bluffing, that I'd show back up with a forced apology and a team player smile. But the problem with assuming silence is submission. Sometimes it's just the sound of a trap closing. By 9:03 a.m., half the pre-board packets had failed validation. Every export button gave back a friendly little 502 error followed by try again later. But there was no later. Those decks were scheduled to go live by noon. And without them, investor alignment shattered like a cheap espresso cup on tile. Lucas had stopped smiling. The head of finance was pacing. Their junior analyst, bless her heart, tried copy-pasting screen grabs into a PowerPoint backup. But the graphs weren't just broken. They didn't exist. The datasets behind them were gone, or rather sealed. The access path they'd relied on for years was no longer theirs to open. At 9:26, Melissa from legal slammed open the CFO's glass door without knocking. Darren didn't look up. He was staring at a blank Slack message window, fingers hovering over the keyboard like it might type the apology for him. "Did you fire Mason publicly?" she asked out of breath, holding 3 printed pages stapled and marked with neon flags. He blinked. "What? Did you publicly fire him?" She repeated slower now, on record during a full staff call. He sat back. "I told him to apologize or step down and he said, okay." Melissa stared at him like he'd admitted to arson. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then louder. "You can't do that. Not with his contract. Not with that clause active." She slapped the pages on the table. "Clause 7C, she said, jabbing the highlighted paragraph. "He retains software derivative rights and conditional IP licenses tied to advisory status. If he's removed without cause or process, he owns the tools, the dashboards, the audit shells, the archival mapping. It's not corporate IP. It's his IP. We've been licensing it through Ridge South under active advisory terms. You just severed that. The CFO went pale. That was 20 years ago. Surely that was no. Melissa cut in. It was renewed in 2018. We filed an extension when we rolled into compliance phase 2. Mason's signature. No countersignature from exec. It defaulted to his terms. But he's just a contractor. He was a co-architect, she snapped. And now he's a hostile vendor. By 1004, 4 investors had already requested the final packet. None could access the files. The system kept redirecting to a deactivated license page with a banner that read, "Contact Ridge South Systems for authorization." That was me. That banner used to say "Powered by." I changed it over the weekend. Lucas had locked himself in a huddle room. I imagine he was Googling how to file an emergency vendor override, but there wasn't one. Not for this. Not for something built by hand, line by line, by someone who didn't believe in giving away the keys to people who never bothered to read the damn map. What they called outdated was leverage, and now they were watching it slip right through their fingers. The emergency board meeting was called for 10:30 sharp. Every exec cleared their calendars. No agendas were sent, no decks prepared, just a single subject line from the chairman's office. Compliance exposure, immediate review required. The first slide wasn't a chart, it was a blank screen with one line of red text. Q3 audit trail file not found. That's when the whispering started. Turns out Lucas's efficiency overhaul wasn't just cosmetic. In his rush to make things look leaner on paper, he'd wiped the only instance of the Q3 compliance log tree, the one I'd warned him about deleting. No versioning, no shadow copies, no cloud redundancy. He'd overwritten everything with a custom dashboard wrapper that looked clean until you tried to drill down and found nothing underneath. The worst part, that audit trail wasn't optional. It was a regulatory requirement for 2 overlapping federal contracts. The absence alone was grounds for investigation, and they couldn't fake a backup now. Not with the timestamp discrepancies already crawling across the metadata. Someone asked about recovery options. Legal replied with a single sentence. Mason Drake was the sole custodian of the encrypted archive. Silence. That was the moment the tone shifted from panic to dread, from disbelief to calculation. I wasn't just the guy who left. I was now the only person on Earth who knew where the audit skeletons were buried and how to exhume them properly. At 11:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Private email. Not from the CFO, not from legal, from the CEO's assistant, Emily, someone I'd worked with for years in 1,000 quiet ways. We used to pass sticky notes between compliance and legal before Slack ruined everything. Subject: read today. Body: Mason. Hope you're well. I know things have escalated. Would you be open to a conversation? No agenda, just a chance to talk. Emily. I didn't respond right away. I just sat at the kitchen table watching the light shift across my laptop, wondering how many of them finally realized that redundant didn't mean replaceable. I wasn't an employee anymore, wasn't a contractor. I was a liability, a firewall, a single point of failure they hadn't documented because they never thought they'd need to. And now they had no choice but to ask. The leverage didn't come from anger. It didn't come from threats. It came from being the last person who still knew how everything actually worked. And that suddenly made me irreplaceable. I never went back. Not to the building, not to the badge scanner, not even to the parking garage with the oil stain I always parked over to hide my car's slow leak. Let them keep their glass cubicles and their kombucha taps. I had no interest in a victory lap. I wasn't angry. I was done. There's a difference. A week after the board meeting, Ridge South Systems was quietly added to the active vendor retainer list. No announcement, no company-wide email, just a line item in procurement system. Ongoing compliance systems consultation advisory level access. The dollar figure next to it, more than I ever made in salary, but I didn't cash it. Not yet. Lucas, meanwhile, had been transitioned to a new role in strategic development. No reports, no meetings, no platform access, just a hollow title and an office with a disconnected landline. Someone told me he spent his first day in exile drafting a pitch for a blockchain initiative no one asked for. HR sent out a memo that read like a forced smile. We are proud to announce a comprehensive legacy system ownership review spearheaded by cross-functional teams committed to transparency and sustainability. In plain English, they were trying to figure out what else I still owned. They'd pulled all the contracts from the archive. Finally started reading them. Not just mine, everyone's. Because I wasn't the only one who'd slipped in clauses during the Wild West years. I was just the first one to enforce one with teeth. Late Thursday evening, my phone rang. Unknown number, but with a 212 prefix. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short. A woman's voice, low and deliberate. Mr. Drake, I represent one of the parent investment funds tied to your former employer. We've reviewed your dashboards. They were elegant, simple, future-proof. We're interested in speaking about consulting opportunities if you're open to it. She didn't say who she worked for. She didn't have to. People like her don't call unless the room has already agreed. I sat back and let it wash over me. Not triumph, not revenge, just the quiet hum of balance being restored. They didn't want me back because they liked me. They wanted me because they finally realized I wasn't ornamental. I was essential. I didn't dismantle their empire. I didn't leak documents or blow any whistles. I simply took back what was mine, then turned off the lights when I left. Let him stumble around in the dark for a while. Turns out it's hard to replace a foundation when you never bothered to learn who laid the bricks. The dashboard faded with a soft blink. No warning, no error message, just a clean, quiet session closed. Like a curtain falling after the final act, I sat at the kitchen table, cradling the same chipped mug I'd used since the merger. The coffee had gone lukewarm, but I didn't mind. There was something poetic about watching the last piece of my old life dissolve in silence. Not in fury, no fanfare, no applause, just closure. The logs were gone now. The system handshakes, license keys, even the old compliance prompts, unlit and archived. No more callbacks, no more midnight alerts on vendor discrepancies or urgent pings about forgotten passwords from interns 2 time zones away. That world with all its artificial urgency and status-chasing egos had finally spun itself out of my orbit. I reached under the table and pulled out a sealed folder. The label was my own handwriting. Post-contract audit keys. Inside were the final offline authorizations. A string of codes that could still access residual shadow logs and encrypted redundancy backups. Insurance in case they got smart enough to beg, but dumb enough to lie. I fed the pages into the cast iron fireplace one by one. No dramatics, just paper curling, darkening, vanishing into smoke. The fire crackled softly, almost like it approved. My laptop chimed again. A message. Last one in the thread I'd left open from earlier from Emily R., CEO's office. Subject: read today. Message. He didn't read the clause, did he? I smiled barely. He hadn't. None of them had. For 19 years, they skimmed contracts, assumed loyalty, and threw titles like vendor around like it meant disposable. But some vendors don't wear name tags. Some build the vault and memorize every exit before you ever move in. I closed the laptop, slid it across the table, and stared out the window. The world looked exactly the same. But everything had changed. They thought removing me would simplify things. Turns out I was the simplification. Some lessons don't come from apologies.